May I kick a little something for the G's and make a few ends as I breeze through 2 in the morning and the party still jumping cause my mama ain't home.
Ah, Rick Rolling. Doesn't that bring you back to a more innocent internet? A time long past when you didn't have to scan your face just to watch 2 young ladies fighting over the last drinking receptacle. Apparently, the people in control of the party don't remember where Barbara Streisand lives, because she lives here. She lives right here. This video is a comparison between the Neve 1073 and the solid-state Logic VHD preamps, but it's mostly a journey into the Neve 1073, specifically the 500 series units made by AMS Neve. And I don't like to repeat what the internet has already done so many times. But let me ask you a question. Does virtually every preamp comparison or review video on the YouTube seem like
Blah, Neve 1073. SSL VHT. Blah. Behringer. Alright guys, don't forget to like, comment, and smash the bell icon.
Don't get me wrong, this is by no means every channel. Some channels go into delicious technical detail. In fact, recently one of my favorite channels released a video on preamps, and I was worried that he had just made this video redundant. Thankfully, it did not, but he did echo precisely the reason I'm making this video.
In my personal experience, all preamps sound pretty much identical when using them in their operating range with condenser mics. When you start driving a mic pre, that's when the distortion characteristics come out, and then you can start hearing differences between mic pre's.
Oh, thank God someone else said it first. I mean, I wasn't going to admit it, was I? And look like I have no clue what I'm doing? The vast majority of videos on the subject seem to play a relatively clean signal through a conservatively gain-staged selection of preamps. And I must admit, rarely would I hear a difference, and on those occasions I only thought I heard a difference. And really, we should all spend more time listening to the government and less time thinking. The other thing I was not seeing was the preamps being tested as hardware inserts on pre-recorded audio, and this is mostly how I planned on using my preamps. Again, I could not have said this better.
In my personal opinion, it's better to record clean and then apply a distortion in the mix.
Since that is my general workflow as well, this brought up a few questions, like regarding the so-called sweet spot. According to the AMS Neve website,
the 1073LB uses 2 discrete preamplifier stages for its microphone preamp circuit. The first stage is active at settings less than 55 decibels. After this point, the second stage is activated. Use the gain switch to set a level above 55 dB, then adjust the final output level with the trim pot to get an optimal recording level into your DAW.
So, that means, but then, okay, I have questions. If the sweet spot requires the second gain stage, which is here, wouldn't a line level input be too hot? Does the line level gain stage have a sweet spot? What does the sweet spot on the first mic level gain stage sound like? What about the output transformer? Does any of this shit actually matter? And where the hell are my pants? I should take this opportunity to disclaim I have no clue what I am doing. I am not a professional musician, recording engineer, or even a generally competent human. That said, please forgive the following exposition, but I want us to be on the same page. This is the audio spectrum from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. This is my voice. This is a sine wave. Let's move it down a bit, then push it into distortion. You see these spikes? These are harmonics created by that distortion. This is harmonic distortion. Since down here my voice sounds like this, and up here my voice sounds like this, adding a bit of harmonic distortion can help an instrument stand out better in a mix. It also acts as a bit of a compressor. And that is why I am so interested in how these 2 preamps handle being overdriven. That's the reason I have them. At least to me, the sound of a preamp being tastefully distorted is much more apparent and distinctive and useful than the color it imparts by merely running sound through it. Okay, If you'll allow me one more diversion before the comparison, I would like to do a bit of ear calibration. In order to have a better idea of what we're listening for, I'm going to play some vocal tracks from what the kids call popular music, with varying amounts of distortion on them, and all of it should be from the original recording. Nothing was added by me. So listen to this. Okay, that is a more than moderate surplus of distortion. Some might call that an artistic amount of distortion. How about something with a little less?
Listen to your heart, those angel voices. They'll say to you, they'll be your guide back home in life.
Or how about,
My girl, my girl, my girl. Talking about my girl, my girl.
and finally,
As how it looks you right between the eyes, you're paralyzed. 'Cause this is Dylan night, and no one's gonna save you from the beast about to strike. You know it's Dylan.
did you hear distortion in all of those? Because I'm not even sure I did. I mean, the first one for sure, and the second one, I'm pretty sure My Girl had a bunch of saturation, but it's being washed in the attic of Hitsville, USA. Bruce Swedeen, the engineer who recorded Thriller, says he doesn't like to add much compression or saturation, but from what I understand, that was recorded through the lovely but overused Shure SM7 into a Neve 1084 preamp into an 1176 compressor. And if the 1084 is anything like the 1073 it is based on, harmonic distortion is added at virtually every gain level, not to mention whatever's added by every other part of the vocal chain. But I think the most relevant sample of distorted vocals was of the late Chester Bennington. I don't know about you, but I heard a fair amount of distortion on his vocal track, atop the distortion innate to his throat, and I think that is the closest to what we're going to hear in this test. And I want you to walk away from this video knowing you heard something. The last thing I want you to do is think. I'm doing a few things here that might cause some bristling. First of all, I'm using the words saturation and distortion interchangeably. For this, I apologize, but in the words of Winston Churchill, I say, Second, I'm going to use way too much distortion in these tests. If you came here for nuance, this is neither the video nor the channel for you. And lastly, I forget the last thing. Whatever. So I am testing these as hardware inserts, because that's mostly how I'm going to use them. The signal is going line out through a Motu 828 balanced into a Neve R10500 rack chassis into each preamp and back into the 828. I have one channel that does the same path but through only an XLR cable as a control, and I'm going to play samples from popular music through them. To point out some of the flaws in my methods, some of the samples come from MP3 multitracks. So there is a sudden roll-off at 18K, but there's no way in hell I can hear 18K, so I don't care too much. Also, although these are mostly dry tracks, they were likely recorded through a similar vocal chain, so I may be doubling up on the Neve-ness of them. And to reach all of the sweet spots in the Neve's gain stages, I will employ the use of a Shure line level to mic level attenuator and a selectable 15 to 25 decibels attenuator. Then there is the question of impedance, which, I don't know. So I'm just going to test all the possibilities. I am going to start with what I think are the most relevant and audible differences I was able to find. So I'm going to attempt to dial in the sweet spot according to the official AMS Neve literature, go a little above, go a little below, and then try to replicate the same amount of harmonic distortion on the SSL and compare the two with pretty visuals. Then I shall progressively go into more and more detail until my viewer retention statistics are low enough to cause self-esteem issues, or I get bored. I think the saturation is most apparent on a clean bass and clean guitar, so first here's the control. and the Neve. And the SSL. And now some vocals.
All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly. All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly. All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly.
I think the distortion is less apparent on these vocals, but I do hear it, and I think they do sound a bit more full than the control. What? Oh, I know what you're thinking. But do you really expect anyone in their right mind to admit to being an immigrant in the United States? In an attempt to better hear the difference between the control and Neve, I did the so-called null test, which is where you take the processed and unprocessed signals, flip the phase of one of them, and add them together. The original signal is cancelled out, leaving only the difference between them. This may not be the most pleasant sounding, but it should give us a better idea of what we're listening for.
All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly.
Now listen to those vocals in the mix and see if you can hear a similar difference.
All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly. All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly. All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly.
I don't know about you, but I think in the last two you don't really hear the distortion, but Michael just sits better in the mix. But there I go again, thinking. Let's listen to some cleaner vocals.
If you look around, the whole world's coming together now, babe. If you look around, the whole world's coming together now, babe. If you look around, the whole world's coming together now, babe.
What do you think, eh? Did you hear a difference between the Neve and SSL? If you heard a difference, make a note of it now, because we're about to measure the difference. I'll write down what I thought I heard too. Hey Siri, could you open the Notes app? Oh, and remind me to get a refill of sildenafil later today? Now, let's take a minute to associate a visual with the distortion we're hearing. All of the samples I'm using are loudness normalized to each other, and before each test, I try my best to match the gain of each signal chain. I do this by playing a 250 Hz sine wave. The sine wave also reveals the harmonics added by each signal path, which for the control is effectively none. But for the Neve, the harmonics look like this, and the SSL looks like this. But remember, the SSL has variable harmonic drive, so turning this knob changes the ratio between the second and third harmonic, and also raises the overall harmonic distortion just a wee bit. Of course, the harmonic distortion isn't necessarily the same for every frequency, so you can play a sine wave that sweeps from 20 to 20,000 Hertz. Doing this on the SSL, you can see the harmonics follow the fundamental through most of the spectrum. However, on the Neve, it's not so linear. With the free app Room EQ Wizard, you can play a sine sweep, and it will graph the level of each harmonic relative to the fundamental, giving us this. In this graph, the blue line at the top is the sine wave's fundamental, the green squiggle at the bottom is the noise floor, and the rest being harmonics of the fundamental, the distortion we are measuring. And just to give you an idea of the relative loudness of these lines, here's some traditional Swedish folk music. I'll let you form your own opinion on where these lines start to matter. This is the Neve preamp with no equalizer attached at all in this position, with the line level to mic level attenuator on the input. Now watch what happens when we run the sine sweep again and raise the level of the fundamental just a bit, then repeat 80 more times. I'm hoping this visualization gives us a better intuition about how the Neve transitions into an overdriven signal. In these 81 samples, the fundamental moves up a total of 4 decibels. Now let's compare that with the Neve, exactly the same, but in high impedance mode. This does change the level at which it distorts, so let's see that again, but compensate with an offset. Now let's add a little context. This is the control signal, which is just an XLR cable, and unlike the rest, this spans a range of about 16 decibels. Notice the noise floor is outside the graph, and it doesn't have any meaningful distortion until the fundamental hits 0 decibels. This is the Neve EQ module without the preamp. This spans about 10 decibels, and it doesn't appear to add any meaningful harmonics. That seems to imply that when you pair the EQ with the preamp, if the EQ is in a neutral position, it shouldn't do much more to the signal. But that would be a fool's implication if you remember how little the impedance changed the graph compared to this. And I should point out this AMS Neve version allows you to insert the EQ betwixt the preamp's output gain stage and the rest of the preamp using this little twisty wire. At first I thought shenanigans, but I was mistaken. Not shenanigans. You can run them both independently one after another and you will be able to get that sound. But having the EQ inserted into the preamp, at least to me, makes a massive difference in usability. Listen to this. This is the same EQ move, first in series, then in insert mode.
All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly. All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly.
I mean, it changes so much. Now the EQ is pushing into the saturation. Is it better? I don't know. But it is so different. Now, let's compare the Neve with the SSL again. Last time I went a little bit above what I would call the sweet spot. This time will be at the sweet spot, at least I am ho, so the difference will be much harder to hear. I really do suggest a good pair of headphones you're very familiar with. With that difference in mind, and with this distortion graph for the Neve, try to imagine what the SSL's distortion graph will look like. If you guessed this, you win cake, which you shall receive at the end of testing.
All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly. All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly. All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly. All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly. All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly. All the colors of the world should beat, loving each other wholeheartedly.
Did you hear a difference? Yeah, I'm not sure either. I mean, if you're sure you heard a difference, then your ears are better than mine. But to me, it's close enough that I'm not sure it's my brain just lying to me, which it does often. When you start to learn about how much of what we see and hear is just our brain making shit up, it actually is a little terrifying, and it fills me with uncertainty. So let us try to make it a bit more obvious. These samples are being played through a cutting-edge technology called a sampler, which comes from the Dutch word sampler, which means one who samples. The sampler I'm using has a feature called a low-frequency oscillator, which was invented by the audio pioneer Tone Loc. If we route the LFO into the playback volume of the sample will get consistently louder and quieter back and forth repeatedly. This way, we can oscillate in and out of being overdriven. I'm hoping this gives us a better idea of the range and quality of the distortion. Let's see. Oh, and I'm inserting the EQ module for this test. I know that's another variable unaccounted for, but here at the Reasonable Institute for More Smartness, we practice what we call lazy science. I also thought this was the most telling comparison, and I don't want this video too bloated, blah, blah, blah. So here we go.
Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. Music loud, women warm, but being kicked around since I was born. Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. Music loud, women warm, but being kicked around since I was born. Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. Music loud, women warm, but being kicked around since I was born.
If you look around, the whole world's coming together now. Babe, can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it? If you look around, the whole world's coming together now. Babe, can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it? If you look around, the whole world's coming together now. Babe, can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it?
Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. Music loud, women warm, but being kicked around since I was born. Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. Music loud, women warm, but being kicked around since I was born. Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. Music loud, women warm, but being kicked around since I was born.
If you look around, the whole world's coming together now. Babe, can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it? If you look around, the whole world's coming together now. Babe, can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it? If you look around, the whole world's coming together now. Babe,
Can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it?
Okay, that was into the second microphone gain stage, just like AMS Neve tells us to do. I feel this configuration in high impedance gave the most pleasing saturation. Remember, this is with a 50 decibel attenuator on the input. Without that, we have to lower the gain well into the first stage, which sounds like this.
Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. Music loud, women warm, I've been kicked around since I was born. Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. Music loud, women warm, I've been kicked around since I was born. Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. Music loud, women warm, I've been kicked around since I was born.
If you look around, the whole world's coming together now. Babe, can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it? If you look around, the whole world's coming together now. Babe, can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it? If you look around, the whole world's coming together now. Babe, can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it?
Okay, I'm going to end it there. I wanted this to be an extensive comparison, but it's already too long, and there's about 1,000 little details that I could have focused on. But seriously, that. There seem to be endless ways you can use the Neve and still get a pleasing sound from it, but I felt I had to make some choices and show you what I thought were the most relevant comparisons. Don't take the actual settings I used too seriously. When I'm actually using the Neve practically, I tend to ignore the details and just turn the big red knob until it distorts, then dial it back a bit, and that's it. In my debatably humble viewpoint, this thing will sound like a Neve no matter what you do to it. But remember, I have no clue what I'm doing. I mean, I only made this video because I kept seeing all these comparison videos that were like,
big, full-bodied, perhaps a bit baked. Essence of truffles, long finish, Chambertin 76. Bravo, Fraser.
Meanwhile, I'm over here sipping my
White Zinfandel.
not hearing any difference. And almost nobody seemed to be using these preamps the way I, perhaps misguidedly, was using them, which was overdriven. And even then, I think the differences between the SSL and Neve are still quite subtle. I mean, they'll both do the job just fine. I don't know. I just don't know. I do hope that these comparisons are helpful to someone. I can't say what I did in this video was correct, but I'm hoping it's at least different. You know, there's a couple of opinions I've formed whilst rotating on this immense space potato. One is that, with some exception, you don't know anything about a thing unless you do that thing for a living. And I do not do this for a living. Two is that all your senses lie to you. Your eyes, ears, nose, they're all just funnels of lies. Given these two supposed truths, I am forced to conclude that I'm talking out of my arse and you probably shouldn't listen to my opinion. Speaking of, here is my opinion. The Neve is great. It for sure is one of those magic boxes that makes everything sound better. The SSL is also very good and perhaps even a bit more versatile. Okay, for those people who have decided to spend the considerable markup to get an AMS or a BAE 1073, I would say buy a full 1073, the preamp and the EQ. This 500 series is lovely, but I might have bought a 19-inch all-in-one had I used one of these before. If $2,000 per channel sounds steep to you, rejoice, because you do not need this. There are plentiful knockoffs of the 1073, and I mean, some of them have got to be good, right? Not only that, but plugins are insane these days. A modern plugin will get you 90% there, and if all you want is non-specific analog saturation, you can get that for far less money. So if I had $400 to buy either a real SSL VHD preamp or a 1073 preamp clone, I would buy neither. I'd save up and buy another API 550. Seriously, you can't make this thing sound bad.
Let's forget the past, slide away. No more lies between us today. Slow motion. Slow motion. You're dead. You're so fucking dead. You wouldn't stop talking, so I could top our head. You're dead. You're so fucking dead. I should have been patient, but I killed you instead. Don't talk anymore. This is your last day. Your eyes locked on mine as your head fell away in slow motion. Slow motion. You're dead. You're so fucking dead. You wouldn't stop talking, so I could take your head. You're dead. You're so fucking dead. I should have been patient, but I killed you instead.
You mean to say this man has solicited the affections of more than one of these women?
He offered it to me.
Me too.
And me?
And me. And he even offered it to me.